I've known him now for well over 40 years. Well, it'd be 40 years this year, of course, that he will have gone to Parliament. So I probably knew him for a decade before that.
I think I met Jeremy nearly 50 years ago in the 70s when he was a trade union activist and officer.
I first met Jeremy in 1978 at the Labour Party conference.
I have worked for Jeremy since 1994, some time.
We became activists together and worked together very, very closely. In fact, there wasn't a picket line that I turned up on that Jeremy wasn't already there.
Jeremy was a Haringey councillor. At that time, it was normal practice for unions and the Labour Party to work together on issues, etc. So we very often came across each other. Well, then, of course, we both went to work for NUPE, National Union of Public Employees.
I can't even remember when I first met Jeremy, but Jeremy has always been around. If you've been involved in campaigns for social justice, anti-racism, international campaigns, you would have seen Jeremy Corbyn, you would have met him. He probably would have come and spoken to you at some point in time.
And then I kind of became his boss. I was a sort of an office manager. And in fact, when I became chair of the constituency Labour Party, Jeremy always used to complain that I used to be his boss in the union and I'm still his boss in the Labour Party.
Jeremy and Bernie Grant and myself worked together quite closely in the 80s. Both Bernie and Jeremy were Haringey councillors. I was next door in Hampstead and Highgate, and we worked on a number of campaigns. We worked on campaigns around left-wing policies in the London Labour Party, and we also worked together on campaigns around black representation, because obviously Bernie and I were very engaged with black representation, but Jeremy was a big supporter also.
But I had to kind of cover his back a fair bit. For example, he and Bernie Grant were working in the same office in North London. And quite regularly, the General Secretary would phone me and say, right, have they absconded again? I expect I'd find them in Haringey if I went looking. But again, in our union, that was fine. To actually be out there working as a Labour councillor in the community, working for the community, was a valid trade union job. But all of that time with Jeremy was repaid tenfold when we had a strike at Adam Brooks Hospital in Cambridge. And it was against the privatisation of domestic services. And it was the first privatisation in the UK. And so it was big and it was difficult. But at that time, Jeremy was doing his campaign to become a Labour MP and came regularly with his old dog, came up to the picket lines to see the women. And then, of course, he was elected as an MP.
We were trying to ensure that there was a progressive edge of left MPs fighting all the time for a new society, how we could change society, the basic principles of socialism. And if you remember, Tony Benn was with us at that point in time. And we worked on the basis of that 1980s commitment that was given about how Labour would bring about an irreversible shift in wealth and power in favour of working people.
And then the women were really impressed when in May 83, they'd been on strike by this time for nearly 5 months. Jeremy used to still come up to the picket line with his old dog, and they couldn't get over the fact that this MP was coming up to visit them. And that is absolutely typical Jeremy.
I was elected in '97, Jeremy was already here, and what we were providing through the Socialist Campaign Group was an alternative to the then new Labour government. So both of us, for example, we worked on preparing alternative budgets to Gordon Brown's budgets, ones that were more radical, particularly around tackling poverty, making sure that we were campaigning for increase in benefits, child benefit, also the campaign for a decent pension for all pensioners as well. We were campaigning for the investment in public services, in the NHS, in education, in local government, but we were also campaigning against privatisation and the private finance initiatives that the new Labour government then was imposing on public services. But of course also we were campaigning for Irish unity, bringing about peace in Northern Ireland. And then of course whilst Labour was in government at that time, the biggest political disaster was the Iraq War, and we both campaigned together to oppose the Iraq War, to mobilise the vote against it in Parliament, working with people like Robin Cook and others.
That was really a lonely place for him and the handful of other MPs that voted against Iraq. He spoke spectacularly and passionately against the war, and always has done against war.
Well, I met Jeremy in 2003, I think, when the war on Iraq started actually, and we started this movement, Stop the War movement, the coalition that we have at that time between Stop the War, Muslim Association Britain and other, CND and others, and Jeremy was in the middle of that actually.
The Socialist campaign group of members of Parliament had to choose a candidate for the leadership. We didn't expect to win, but we wanted to run somebody in principle. So we were in a meeting in a smallish room in Parliament, and basically we went round the table and everyone had an excuse not to run. I said, well, I've done it already. John McDonnell said, I've done it. Somebody else said they felt they were too old. And finally we got to Jeremy, and Jeremy looked a bit embarrassed and flustered. But then he said, oh, all right then. And he claims that I tweeted about it then and there. So when he came out of the room, everyone knew who the Socialist Campaign Group's candidate. And of course, contrary to what we all thought, he won and became leader of the Labour Party.
So it was no surprise that when he put himself up for the leadership of the Labour Party, everybody thought, oh, he's just the left candidate, and that's how it was going to be. But he had spent so much time personally interacting with Labour Party members that I'm not surprised that he did so well.
The membership went through the roof, and he brought huge swathes of people into the membership, including, for all of the hype that's given to all of the young people that he brought in, there were hundreds of letters written by people who owned typewriters. Now, they are not young, so his appeal was broad.
I think people need to realise that when people know Jeremy right the way across the globe, he'll turn up in places and they'll know him for the work that he's done on a particular campaign in that country or that region, and it'll be around human rights in particular, anti-imperialism of course, anti-colonialism. What amazed me is the amount of work he got through, the travel he undertook. But my memory of Jeremy is always on a Monday morning I would get a call from Jeremy asking me, what's on in Parliament today? When is the vote? And am I needed? And I'd say, yeah, the vote will be at 10 o'clock. You need to come back. And I'd say, where are you? And he'd say things like, Western Sahara. The bizarre thing was, and I don't know how he did it, he always got back for the vote. Extraordinary.
He has taken footballs to Africa. He's taken probably jam all around the world. He doesn't stop on human rights.
When this mosque was occupied by Abu Hamza and his supporters, unfortunately, this gave the opportunity to the other extremists from the far right to come and protest here outside the mosque, and this made a huge tension between communities, and therefore it was very important to remove Abu Hamza from the mosque and bring this mosque back to the community. Jeremy was in the middle of it. He was a great supporter to the move and make sure that no further tensions happened between the communities. So without Jeremy, we wouldn't be able to be where we were at that time, and he managed to bring communities outside here, the mosque, to have a vigil outside the mosque. More than 500 people attended from all communities to show solidarity to the Muslim community at that time. Without Jeremy, we wouldn't be able to do that.
Jeremy's response to Grenfell was, as it always is, on the back of tragedy. He went straight to Grenfell and greeted the people in the most sincere and unassuming way that he always does in the event of tragedy.
My family first migrated from Turkey to London in the early 90s. The Kurds were being persecuted quite heavily back in Turkey. During that time, they were told they were going to be deported back to Turkey, and it was at this point, with the help of a friend, that they approached Jeremy at his surgery. They wrote a letter presenting their case to him about their situation, and that's when he intervened with their case. And what really helped was just him being an advocate for the Kurdish community. So at that time, he knew the struggles of Kurds back in Turkey, and he had that knowledge and understanding, and he was really able to support our family during that time.
I travelled to India and Bangladesh with Jeremy in December 86, early January 7, and we met politicians in India, in Delhi and Calcutta. Then we took the train from Delhi to Calcutta, the Rajdhani Express. We played chess on the way, which he beat me 3 times. We read books about India, the partition, how it came about. We read about Mahatma Gandhi. He was very keen to know. I had to bluff him that in order to have a bit of leisurely time, that 1st of January was a public holiday. So I took him to Agra, Taj Mahal, to see that. And then on the way back, I said, you know, Jeremy, I had to lie to you that today was a public day because I wanted you to come to Taj Mahal. He was so annoyed with me. He wanted to fit in some more meetings on that day. And then we went to Bangladesh. After spending 3 days in Calcutta, we flew to Bangladesh and met all the politicians there from different political parties. Sylhet was the main city we went to, which is where the majority of these Bangladeshis are living here. We took some immigration cases with us, local cases, to deal with meet their families, and then we came back with a whole lot of cases.
My parents became Labour members following Jeremy's help with my family. I then became a Labour member and a councillor, and it was really just seeing his politics. That's what inspired me, and the morals and the values of the Labour Party that I was drawn to, and how he always stood up for minoritized communities in the borough. It didn't matter what race or background or religion, and that is what really inspired me to become a local councillor.
I've lived in Islington we've both lived in Islington for a long time, since the 1990s, and I lived here prior to that. And I always remember him cycling around the borough. He never ever had any reminders or anything like that. And it's astonishing to see people just waving at him, shouting, "Hello, Jeremy," like he was their friend, which he was. They actually knew him because they'd seen him in their schools, they'd seen him in their community centres, they'd seen him on their campaigns, just walking about the streets, sitting in their cafes and talking to people. So his constituents have always felt that he's just part of the community.
To the constituents of Islington North, Jeremy means a huge amount. He's been the MP since 1983. He is supportive and guides thousands of people with their needs. You can't walk down the street in Islington North without people waving, "Hello Jeremy, hello Jeremy," and he's got this little black notebook that he carries around, and he brings in casework on a regular basis from everybody that he meets. He is determined to put anybody in need in the right direction. He has always had the most enormous advice surgeries over the years and never cut back on, he's never wanted to prioritise security over meeting people, which has always been a problem for us because it's our job to worry about that sort of thing. But it's his home, Islington North. He loves what he does there. He's
also completely engaged with very, very local issues.
Yeah.
If you mention the Hilldrop Community Centre, which is the hub of our little community here in Tufnell Park Ward, he knows about it. He knows what it's doing. He knows about our mutual aid group, which started at the beginning of the pandemic and is still going, and often mentions it. This is just a group of neighbours helping each other, and he remembers people's names, and it's this ability to go from these really big momentous issues and understand completely their relationship to how people actually behave towards each other on the ground in very local communities. I've just never met anybody like that who has that kind of insight, really.
I think anybody that wants to talk about managing young Jeremy would only have to talk to somebody like Nicolette about managing old Jeremy.
Jeremy hasn't actually changed a huge amount in my view, but he has grown enormously. Internal change is not so obvious to outsiders, but you can't go through what Jeremy's gone through and not change. But he remains the even-tempered, kind, active, hard-working, passionate individual that he always was, and a terrific person to work for and with.
He makes this point of spending Fridays going to visit schools in the constituency, and he gets, when he tells you about it, he's got really excited about conversations or in a particular classroom or with some particular group of kids.
During the 2017 election, I was a political advisor at the time, and we were all seconded back to the party. And then I had the job for what was called advance. So what I would do is go along and map out Jeremy's route to all of these different events. And what had been happening is we had huge amounts of people showing up for every single event. And sometimes it was actually Jeremy just stood in a town square somewhere, with hundreds of people around him, giving huge, really excited to see him, and it was amazing. But we had this one problem. Jeremy kept stopping to take selfies with people, and it was the bane of all of his staff. So I said, you know what, we have to be practical. Why don't we put in selfie time? And somebody said to me, you can't possibly write that on the sheet, Belle. I'm like, we've just got to be realistic. He's not going to listen to us. When anyone wants to take a photo with him, he's going to stop. So we built in 10 to 20 minutes of selfie time every single time he went everywhere. And hey presto, it worked.
He seems to me a very rare individual in the way that his communication is brilliant. Like you say, he just sort of really listens and really kind of thinks and then responds in sort of such a genuine way. None of it is false. None of it is kind of for show.
Well, that's about a mean question to ask an employee, isn't it? Would I call him a friend?
He was always a firebrand. He always had an agenda that was 10 feet long. He always decided that he could fit in 8 meetings a day. He never stopped to draw a breath. He never stopped to eat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
What Jeremy means to people is absolute principle, dedicated, selfless commitment, always voting on the basis of principle, always acting on the basis of principle, but always acting on the basis of absolute humanity. And that's why he's not just respected, he's loved, because of that ability to care for people and always make the right call. And throughout the time I've known him, that's the way he's behaved. This is what I believe in. No matter what they throw against me, I'm going to stick to this cause. And eventually, he's proved right.
I think I could honestly say that it has been a real pleasure and a humbling honour to have counted Jeremy as my friend and my comrade over nearly 50 years of my life. So, I get choked even saying it. He's always been a very, very special person in my life, and always will be.